This is Charlie Crockett, Texas musician and descendant of Davy Crockett, inviting you to visit the Alamo. It's not the same Alamo you, remember. There's lots of new things to experience, like the 500 artifacts inside the Alamo exhibit at the Ralston Family Collection Center, the new Mission Gate and Lunette outdoor exhibit, and Surrounded, the Alamo Augmented Experience. It's all part of an ongoing restoration and expansion that will write the Alamo's next chapter. So don't wait. Plan your visit today at thealamo.org.
Stories bigger than Texas, the Alamo podcast. Come and take it. Those 4 words and a gunshot marked the beginning of the Texas Revolution on October 2nd, 1835, 190 years ago today. Today we reveal what led to the Battle of Gonzales, how its battle cry evokes the spirit of the American Revolution, and what became of the cannon at the center of this fight. I'm your host, Emily Balcom. Today we're joined by Thomas Ledesma, the Alamo's researcher. Thanks for coming back on the podcast, Thomas.
Well, I'm glad to be here today, Emily.
During the time of the Texas Revolution, Gonzales was known as DeWitt's Colony after a man named Green DeWitt. Who was he?
Green DeWitt is an American by birth. He's born in Lincoln County, Kentucky, about 1787, and grew up there for a while, and then eventually moved to Spanish, Missouri. And then as he got older, he moved back to Kentucky to finish his education. But what's interesting, parallel here is, of course, you have individuals like Stephen F. Austin also growing up in Spanish, Missouri for a time. And so I think because of that location, they're seeing what's happening in Texas. Of course, things change and Mexico becomes a nation and this impresario system begins to become prevalent. And so Green DeWitt kind of shadows Stephen F. Austin in that way, where they both end up coming to northern Mexico, Texas, and becoming impresarios. It's about 1825, after a few attempts at getting a land grant approval, that he finally is successful in that. And so he gets his land grant. It's to the opposite side of Stephen F. Austin's colony. They're right next to each other. And his contract is for about 400 families on the banks of the Guadalupe River. What becomes the de facto capital of his colony is going to be Gonzales. And he's naming that after the then governor of the territory, Rafael Gonzales. His endeavors as an impresario have ups and downs. He's able to fulfill some contracts. He actually wants to go ahead and expand out his colony more. And so in 1835, he goes to Monclova, to the governmental head of this area, and says, I want to apply for more contracts to fulfill and receive more land. And while he's down there doing that, an epidemic sweeps through. And I've seen both malaria or cholera, one of those two. He contracts that and unfortunately passes away. So right before the outbreak of the revolution, he's out of the story.
And if someone's an early student of Texas history and they see DeWitt's Colony written and they're wondering where this is, just translate it modern day to Gonzales.
Essentially, yeah, the area surrounding Gonzales. And I believe that colony has sections of about maybe 3 modern Texas counties today in it.
In 1831, DeWitt had asked Mexico for protection against the Comanche raids and received a weapon that ended up having unpredictable significance.
Sure. And I think it's important to realize the geographic location of Gonzales. Now, obviously, geography is a big important part of history, Texas history, and understanding why things are happening and where they're happening. And if we look at Gonzales, it's such an interesting location. We think about the Anglo sphere of influence in Texas is obviously in the east. You have San Felipe de Austin, Washington on the Brazos, etc. And then the more Mexican sphere of influence is really based around San Antonio. And here's Gonzales in the middle of these two spheres, trying to strike a balance in between. Because of that, you're outside of these spheres, not just politically, but also for protection. And so you need help. You're going to have to call some help from the colonies or call for some help from the government. And who's going to get there first? We don't know. So Indian raids, Native American raids, different kinds of outlaws and things going up and down the Camino Real and the highways around that area is a common occurrence. And so, yeah, in 1831, Green DeWitt's going to ask the officials in San Antonio de Bejar for either soldiers to come out there or for an artillery piece, and the government says we can loan you a cannon. And that's what they end up doing.
By the fall of 1835, the storm clouds of revolution are forming. Relations between Texas and Mexico are falling apart, and the commander of Mexican troops asks for that cannon back.
Right. There's so many different things happening at this time that I think it's important to kind of go back and maybe highlight some of those issues that are occurring. If we go back to 1824, one of the big governmental changes that are happening is Coahuila y Tejas are joined into a singular territory. That's why Green DeWitt's going to Monclova to ask for more land for colonization. You have several different uprisings happening. You have the Fredonian Rebellion, which colonists overwhelmingly are against. They're saying, let's not pick a fight with the government. Of course, you have Mexico, the Mexican government, reacting to those issues by passing the April 6th law in 1833, so, halting immigration from the United States. And of course, what follows is you have several disturbances, like the Anahuac disturbances. Stephen F. Austin ends up in jail. The Mexican presidency is almost vacated by Santa Anna, and Vice President Farias steps in and makes sweeping reforms. And the centralist backing of Santa Anna doesn't like that very much, so they go ahead and get him out of office. The Militia Reduction Act, which is very important to this story because we're asking for, they're no longer states, they're military districts, to reduce their militias to essentially nothing, and also centralize locations for artillery pieces. And that's when the spotlight really gets put on Gonzales. By May 12th of 1835, Zacatecas has been captured by centralist forces. Stephen F. Austin, as I mentioned, is in jail. You have other things happening. By September 1st, 1835, Stephen F. Austin is finally returning to Texas. And there's a naval skirmish that happens out in the Gulf of Mexico. So tensions are already rising and violence is already occurring to certain levels at this time. What also happens in early September, Mexican soldiers are dispatched to Gonzales to provide security, to provide a presence for the government. And there's a little bit of a skirmish in Adam Zumwalt's general store. Jesse McCoy gets roughed up by some Mexican soldados, and the townspeople aren't too happy about that. And so there's already this tension rising in Gonzales. And so it's important to realize that it's not just the Mexican army showing up to retrieve this peace. There's other instances of friction happening, and we're just waiting for the right moment for it to really boil over.
Former Alamo curator Dr. Bruce Winders calls it the summer of discontent in 1835, and that's what you're referring to.
Exactly right.
And then in Gonzales, it just kind of all culminates into this one cannon.
Exactly right. So orders are dispatched to San Antonio. Hey, we're going to enforce the Militia Reduction Act. And for folks that don't realize that, basically the law says for every 500 citizens, you can call out one militia member to defend the town. In Mexico City, that works out great because the national barracks are down the street. Here on the frontier in San Antonio, that's not going to be sufficient enough because large raiding parties, who knows who's going to come attack this place, could happen at any moment. You want to have sufficient troops. And there's obviously not a super strong Mexican military presence. It fluctuates because of the nature of this new republic being born. There's violence in central and southern Mexico, sometimes in northern Mexico, so troops are moving throughout. But of course, Colonel Ugartechea is here, and he's beginning to really solidify the presence of troops in San Antonio. And with the changeover from states to military districts, General Cos is on his way up to take over the district, and really 3 districts in this area. But September 26th, those initial orders are being sent out. There is a Corporal Casimiro de Leon who's dispatched with about 4 other troops to Gonzales with a letter saying, look, this is for your mayor. We're here to take back this government property, and that's it. And one of the things, if we go back to this original request for the cannon, it's put in the paperwork that at any moment the government can retrieve its property back. One of the issues that we have here is when Corporal de Leon gets to Gonzales, perhaps the mayor's not there, or an alderman's not there, or an alcalde's not there, and that's what we understand is Mayor Ponton is not in Gonzales. And so the townspeople initially refuse him. And they take it a little bit of a step further. They actually detain the corporal and his troops. And once that information gets back to San Antonio, Colonel Ugartechea is going to want to send a larger force out there under Lieutenant Castañeda with 100 dragoons, that's mounted infantry, to go ahead and retrieve this cannon.
And a standoff of sorts ensues on a riverbank.
Castañeda actually runs into one of these soldiers that's been let go, and he's told, hey, they detained us for a little bit. They have a cannon. There's supposedly more colonists coming. You guys have 100 men. They might have 150. Supposedly an indigenous person is also in the area and is coming through Gonzales and ends up walking into the Mexican camp and telling them the same thing, that, hey, there's a lot of colonists over there. You guys might be outnumbered pretty soon. Castañeda is in a precarious situation. Documents show Ugartechea telling him, you will go and retrieve this government property. If need be, you will detain people who are resisting this. But then he sort of has a different thought on this. He goes, well, if you find yourself outnumbered, don't get into any trouble that you can't get yourself out of. Don't blemish the honor of Mexican arms, essentially. If you're going to be outnumbered and you might face defeat, well, then withdraw and await further orders. And this just gets further complicated when General Cos begins to arrive, and now he's into the loop. So now you have Ugartechea issuing orders to Castañeda responding to those orders, but now Ugartechea is asking for direction from General Cos. And General Cos is not only trying to respond to Ugartechea, but he's also trying to get orders or clearance from Minister of War in Mexico City, Tornel, on what they should be doing. They want to show their strength and their authority, but they want to make sure that they're skirting that line of opening up a rebellion in the territory. And that seems to be very clear in the primary documents that we want to assert our authority here, but we also don't want to push these people to that we're having a gunfight happening in the streets of Gonzales.
Really interesting insight there. The Texans do decide they want to fight, and they come up with a battle cry, come and take it.
originally, when the Mexican army gets to Gonzales, about the 29th or so, the ferry's tied up on the other side. They cannot cross. There's about 18. The old 18 are there. They refuse to treat with the Mexican army. They're saying, look, Lieutenant Castañeda, our mayor's not here. We cannot give you this government property. You have to wait for them to return. We're not even sure what artillery piece you're necessarily talking about. There's 2 here, and so on and so forth, and they're buying time. And Castañeda says, I'll give you about 24 hours to figure out what the next move is. And he realizes that he's sort of in a precarious situation. He gets that information that more colonists may be coming to Gonzales to confront his force. So he begins to move upriver and buy some time. It won't be till about the next day that more colonists begin to move in, about October 1st or so, and they have an election. And a gentleman named John Moore is elected colonel of the militia. And so now he will be the main spokesman for the colonists there. People are getting their dander up. It's October 2nd. Texans are talking to one another, thinking about what should we do? Should we cross the river and try to get the jump on Castañeda's forces before he can get reinforcements? And there's a sermon held. A local pastor gives him a sermon, harkens back to the spirit of 76, and, we're fighting tyranny and all these things. And somewhere out of the ether, somebody decides, what, we're going to make this flag. Supposedly it's coming from a wedding dress that Green DeWitt's daughter had. We're not sure who exactly comes up with the phrasing, but of course we get that iconic flag of come and take it with the cannon tube on it.
So the white flag, come and take it, was originally made out of a wedding dress?
That's, according to the stories that we have, that is what they say.
That's remarkable that's the piece of white fabric out there. And you mentioned it harkens back to the American Revolution. I've seen comparisons to the "Don't Tread on Me" slogan and flag.
Sure, and there's a prevailing thread throughout the Texas Revolution where people are hearkening back. I like to call it the spirit of 76, because how many generations removed is this generation from that struggle? One or two. Some of them fought in the War of 1812, in that second facing off we had with the English. So a lot of folks are looking back towards those heroes of the American Revolution and their actions and renewing that spirit. There's several connections you can make between the Texas Revolution and the American Revolution for sure.
We talked about it a few episodes ago with the Victory or Death letter
Exactly
that
right.
Travis wrote. Mm-hmm. Now, in the early morning hours of October 2nd, 1835, the first gunshots of the Texas Revolution ring out. How did the Battle of Gonzales unfold?
Right. So I mentioned that the night of October 1st into the morning of October 2nd, Lieutenant Castañeda has decided to move his forces away from the town of Gonzales proper to, buy himself some time, but also to look for another good place to ford the river and possibly cross over. Now, here's our issue, is he has those orders saying retrieve the artillery piece and enforce the rule, but also be cautious of what you're doing. And so it's really up to him what he's going to do. Letters continue to go back to his superiors, and those gentlemen are having discourse with each other about what to do. And the Texans, again, are chomping at the bit. They'll end up going to shadowing the Mexican Army's movement. Ezekiel Williams' farm is the place they end up. Mexican Army, according to some sources, about 250, 300 yards away. And small groups of Texan skirmishers or scouts begin to cross the river. And you got to bear with me because it's how the story goes, but a dense fog has rolled down the banks of the Guadalupe, and people can kind of see each other, and I think those are Mexican horsemen, I think those are Texan colonists, what's happening? And all of a sudden, it breaks loose. Some shots are fired. Some accounts say there's a Mexican charge across a shallow part of the river that turns around, and it's a very brief firefight, if you will. 2 cannon, according to some sources, are used. A small iron gun, a larger bronze gun are fired off at the enemy. And all of a sudden, you have white flags of truce come up and say, hey, let's talk about this situation. And one of the gentlemen that is really trying to avoid bloodshed during this conflict is Dr. Lancelot Smithers. And he's coming in from San Antonio, and he's trying to help both sides, and he's saying, well, let me talk to the Mexican side. And they're very weary of him. He tries to talk to the colonists, and they think he's an agent for the Mexican Army. And poor Lancelot Smithers, you just look at his story during the Texas Revolution and beyond, and it does not end well for him. But he's getting beat up by all kinds of folks during the Revolution. He's just trying his best to be a helpful person, but he's kind of negated to the back. And Lieutenant Castañeda and Colonel Moore have this discussion about what's happening and why it's happening. And Colonel Moore's position is Santa Anna has become a centralist dictator, and you are supporting his agenda by taking this weapon from us that we believe we have the legal right to have in order to protect ourselves. The government is negating its duties to protect its citizens by taking this away from us and not providing us additional security. And they entice him to join the colonist movement. They say, we support the Constitution of 1824, and if you are a good, Federalist and Republican, you will join our side. And Castañeda's response to that is, I'm an officer in the Mexican Army, and I have a job to do. I'm not a Santanista. I do not believe in centralism. I, too, believe in the Constitution, but at this moment, I'm an officer in the Mexican Army, and I have a duty to discharge. And here we have this next shift is orders moving to and fro. Gonzales is about 70 miles from San Antonio. On average, give or take, the rider and the horse it could take up to 2 days possibly to get a message back and forth. If you have rotating riders along a route, then maybe you could get it in 1 day or less. But orders are now coming back to Castañeda saying, do not engage these people in a firefight, especially if you're outnumbered, and withdraw. So these shots are fired. The two sides come across from this little meeting on the banks of the river. And again, sources say that the cannons fired off once more at the Mexican forces and they withdraw down the road back to San Antonio.
Without the cannon.
Without the cannon.
The Battle of Gonzales is really more of a skirmish than a battle, but it's significant because it marks a clear, defined break between Texas and Mexico.
Right. And as I mentioned earlier, there are several instances of violence and demonstration against Mexican authority. Anahuac disturbances, Fredonian Rebellion, the battle in the Gulf of Mexico between those two ships. You have all these things coming to a head, but now you have an organized resistance that is not afraid to take the first move. And so now you have this clearly defined break. And with Stephen F. Austin returning, he's the head of the peace party. And then all of a sudden he's locked up in a Mexican dungeon and comes back and witnesses these events. And you can tell by reading his letters that he still is hoping for a peaceful resolution. He understands that violence is more than likely going to incur.
Like we were talking about a moment ago with the parallels with the American Revolution, the Battle of Gonzales is sometimes referred to as the Lexington of Texas. What are those parallels?
Right. There are several parallels between those two events. Interestingly enough, I mentioned earlier about the Militia Reduction Act and obviously the reduction of militia members in different areas, but also the gathering up of material of war, gunpowder, cannons, all those things into centralized government locations. And that's essentially what's happening leading up to the Battle of Lexington and Concord. The British forces are looking to secure a depot of gunpowder because they are trying to curtail any ability for angry colonists to have the ability to arm themselves to defy what they see as tyrannical laws or impressment or anything to that nature. So the parallels are very clear in these two instances where we're focused on armaments, materials of war, we're taking them away, and colonists are saying, we have a legal right to have this. We had a promise from you for protection. And so whether we're protecting ourselves from raiders or outlaws, or we're protecting ourselves from what we view as a tyrannical government, those parallels are there.
Some of the men who fought in Gonzales later fought and gave their lives at the Alamo.
Right. So, of course, we have the Immortal 32. They are stood up at the time as the Gonzales Ranging Company and mustered into service by Byrd Lockhart in 1836. When Captain Albert Martin, takes Colonel Travis's famous victory or death letter into Gonzales, that group of individuals is easily brought together because they've been formed already. Those men answer the call for help. They're the first group to answer and arrive to the Alamo. Of course, Fannin has some issues with orders and organization and strategy overall getting to San Antonio, but these men from Gonzales answer the call and get to the Alamo. And so, again, only known reinforcements that we have record of. Research is always continuing on what happened during those fateful days, but as of right now, only known reinforcements.
It's a good reminder of how much this small town of Gonzales gave during the Revolution.
100%. Some of the individuals, we have Almaron Dickinson, 36-year-old man from Pennsylvania. He had a hat shop in Gonzales. Albert Martin, 28-year-old Rhode Islander. He had moved via New Orleans to Gonzales and opened up a store with his family members. And then, of course, we have our youngest Alamo defender coming from Gonzales, William P. King, 15 years old, born in Mississippi, and then his family makes their way to Texas, and he's going to take the place of his father. We think about life in the time period, especially in Texas, and you have a large family, and this oldest son is going to step up and say, Dad, if you perish in battle, our family is going to be in a world of hurt. And you need to take care of the family, and I can take your stead. And so William P. King rides into the Alamo, and will meet his fate here. And one statistic that really puts it in perspective for me, looking into the battle and those individuals here, is about the members or individuals from Gonzales make up about 20% of the garrison. And the loss of these men is devastating to the town. It's obviously devastating to all the individuals there, all the families that are left without a brother, a son, a father, whomever they may be. But it's also devastating to the town physically. With the loss of the Alamo and the shattering of that defensive strategy of the Alamo-Goliad line, when Sam Houston musters his forces at Gonzales and they get word of the defeat, the town is razed. The revolution is catastrophic to Gonzales in multiple ways. What starts out, I think, as a hopeful, defiant tone, which many of those people will carry through the rest of the revolution and to the Republic and so on and so forth down the generations, definitely takes a hit because they lose it all. Some of these families literally lose it all.
On October 2nd, there were two cannons technically under dispute in Gonzales. What size were they and where are they today?
This is a complicated question with a lot of theories and a lot of research to still be done. But the primary documents, looking at them, it's clear that in 1831, a bronze gun, a 6-pounder, later on described by Ugartechea and some of the officers as an 8-pounder bronze gun, has been donated or loaned to the town of Gonzales. However, they also make note in primary sources of a smaller iron gun, like an Esmerel, is how the Mexican army is describing that, essentially a swivel gun, if you will, something to that effect. Again, primary documents from both Texans' side and the Mexican side note that the 2 guns are being used during the battle. Now, the larger gun is put on a cotton carriage axle essentially and made mobile that way, and the smaller iron gun, they go to find some cottonwood trees or tree in general and cut the log up to make wheels for it, and this kind of rudimentary carriage for the gun. And again, sources claim that both guns are used during the battle. What happens to them is interesting. Probably the small iron gun it's rough shape. They talk about having to make some adjustments to the vent holes and reboring holes and things like that. It had been buried for a little bit, it had been exhumed, and so then they realized, well, this gun, it's not a big piece. It's not necessarily a game changer. We're headed towards San Antonio for the siege of Behar. This gun is not a siege weapon. So we can just go ahead and bury it somewhere, and if we need it, we'll come back later, so on and so forth. And that gun is buried. And the bronze gun more than likely makes it to San Antonio, used in the battle or siege of Behar, and possibly moved into the Alamo and used during the battle. Now, in 1936, an iron gun surfaces in Gonzales, and that piece is on display in their museum, and it's claimed that that's the small iron gun from the battle and skirmish. According to them, that's very possibly the iron gun used there. The bronze gun at the Alamo, we know that some of the guns are deposited into the San Antonio River. Some are buried around the northwest corner of the Alamo compound, where Samuel Maverick eventually establishes a homestead and business, and he finds several tubes in his yard. And one theory that we have evidence for is we know that he takes a bronze tube and sends it to New York to a bell foundry. And it's a donation to a local parish, St. Mark's Episcopal Church, and that this bronze tube is melted down to provide the metal to cast the bell for this parish. And that bell is still hanging in the belfry at St. Mark's. And
just a couple of blocks from the Alamo.
Exactly right. And there are several scholars who do believe that that is the fate of the Come and Take It cannon.
Fascinating backstory. Yeah. People in Gonzales are rightfully very proud of their town's contribution to the Texas Revolution. How do you think that Come and Take It battle cry resonates today?
I think that we look at Come and Take It and we look at the phrase itself and how ancient it is. A lot of these individuals were looking to the classics. You know, those were a foundational part of learned person's education, reading about ancient Greece and Rome and the classics. And so hearkening back to the famous phrase of the Spartans, molon labe, that more than likely is one way that that phrase came to be born. You know, we're going to take what these ancient Greeks, these men who founded democracy, these people who stood up against a mighty empire and tyranny to fight for freedom. There has to be a parallel thread to these folks in 1835 thinking that they're doing the same thing. We're standing up to tyranny. We're standing up to a government that has become corrupt and has switched on us. It seems to be that that phrase is timeless, essentially. It's from ancient times to their present time to today. I mean, you can find it in all kinds of ways today, from bumper stickers to collegiate sports teams using it to everything.
You don't even have to be in the Gonzales area. Just drive anywhere in Texas,
sure,
and you will find a Come and Take It flag, a bumper sticker, something.
100%. 100%. It has become synonymous with the state as a Lone Star flag.
Thomas Ledesma, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Emily. Glad to be here.
Be sure to check out the podcast notes. We've linked to an essay the Alamo's former curator, Dr. Bruce Winders, wrote about those events leading up to the Battle of Gonzales, again, that he calls the Summer of Discontent. You've been listening to Stories Bigger Than Texas, the Alamo Podcast.